And so to bring up the conversation back to like the DAO stuff and the governance mechanisms, can you unpack a little bit of what's going on with this Charter City project?
Well, yeah, so we just had this, it's something that we've been cooking on for a while at this point, because I've been seeing a lot of charter cities and I have not been impressed with their management. I think that it's very doable. We had done outreach as part of the Pronatalist Foundation to understand what countries are doing. And some of the countries we reached out to were like, yeah, we're having major problems. Like huge parts of our country are just disappearing, basically. And because of this, we will try, especially the educated youth is who they're really struggling to keep. They're like, even if we have kids, when we educate them, they just leave, they go to cities and other countries, and then it's hard to keep anything operational, right? And so they're open to the idea of sectioning off parts of their country to operate under different legal frameworks if it brings in a lot of really high tech innovation. And so the way that we would structure this is we would put together a pitch for them and into how this would operate for them. Now, we really dislike that most of the existing charter cities have targeted either disrupted countries, like countries that are not really economically stable or politically stable, like typically like in Latin America or like the Mediterranean. Whereas our number one country that we're looking at right now is the Isle of Man, which would be a great place because you're in Europe already, incredibly politically stable. You don't really need to worry about anything there. And then to make the core draw of the project, that the key law in terms of what you can do in terms of research would be consent. But outside of that, anything can be tested in terms of medical research, in terms of, well, any type of research that you wanted to do. And so this would allow for people who wanted to do like potentially life-saving treatments that aren't cleared by the FDA or any public organization yet, which you can't do at Prospera. They use the medical establishment of other countries to judge what they can do to come and do this medical treatment. But it would also allow for stuff like if you wanted to do euthanasia tourism, if you wanted to do, all sorts of stuff that's not possible right now. Because when I think about how do you build out a country like this? Well, the number one thing is, do you need there to be an economic reason for people to want to come there? You can try to get people to come there as like a cult for like ideological reasons, like, oh, the government's operating in this way. But I think historically that hasn't really worked efficiently. Kind of worked with the US, but even in the US, the economic draw was the big one for a lot of people. So if you can create a legal structure that offers an economic arbitrage opportunity, then you can get people to come there. And then we can combine that with sort of the pronatalist pluralistic ideology that we promote, to create both a reason why people would want to come there. Like, okay, if I am a pronatalist who is interested in my kids growing up in a culture where they see the people around them having a lot of kids, but still being technophilic, still being very AI engaged, stuff like that, that this is where I want to raise my kids, and that there's going to be a lot of economic opportunities for me there because it is where the most advanced medical research that is doing stuff that other people can't do is happening. And obviously a key area where we have a lot of connections where we would want to focus this technology is on human genetic enhancement. So the of humans and stuff like that, which a lot of people want to start doing, but the governing structures that we live in don't basically allow us to do that sort of research yet. And artificial wombs, which is again another area where a lot of people are really afraid. But if you had those two technologies as sort of your specialties, you could have as well as types of cures that are not legal in other places, or the enhancement of children, which is not legal in other places like embryo selection and stuff like that. You could have a community that intergenerationally would have a reason to financially exist and would have a reason for people to come move there if they align with the ideology of the community.
Got it. If they align with the ideology of the community. So maybe this is a lot of left field, but I'm curious. It sounds like something like this would be a threat. I remember I followed seasteading like about a year ago, or I'm sorry, like 10 years ago. And there wasn't much movement. I first came across, I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. I want to get involved. And, just for very obvious reasons, it was difficult to have movement there. And I'm just curious, like, how can a city like this succeed if there's like, I don't know, a little group of CIA actors, starting to poke holes in the ideology and attack, essentially? Like, how do you prevent psyops and things like that?
Yeah, so sea studying didn't work because it wasn't a viable idea. It worked because the movement was ran by ideologues and they needed a practical operator to be running things.
Hmm.
That's the reason why almost every charter city movement has failed so far, is they have the people who are the ideologues, the word cells, the theorists try to operate something which needs an operator, and an operator is what my background is. Like, that's what this is the difference in our conversation here, right? Like, you're thinking very much like a theorist, right? Where you're like, well, let's have a happy employees, let's have happy, and I'm like, okay, all that matters is who makes the most money and who creates the cheapest products.
To clarify though, I'm just putting out positions, right? I'm just
Yeah, no, I know
these aren't
you're putting out
necessarily my
positions,
positions,
but
but
these positions contrast very well with these two ways of seeing the world.
right.
If you had a operator who was sort of ruthless in implementation of something like this, but who you look at something like Praxis, you look at how much money they raised. Like, why don't they have a country yet? You look at something like Prospera, or you look at something like, these are not bad ideas. They are attracting capital. They are attracting interest. And there's many countries that would like things like this to be offered. Like, there's an obvious demand from the country perspective. Just the problem is that unfortunately, the way we live in our society today, capital is going to flow towards the most the people who can capture public mind share, which is sometimes discorrelated with people who can competently predict future events or have a competent understanding of reality and how businesses work. And one of the things that we would try to build into our community is to ensure that things like that don't happen within our community, and that capital flows can actually go to the most competent individuals at actually running things, and word cells can have their little media empires, but that we need to make sure that we do not give capital to them, or we end up with, like, Miri, there's a reason why the quote unquote AI safety movement has been so spectacularly incompetent at impacting anything in relation to AI safety, or impacting anyone who's involved with like AI work, because they keep giving money to these word cells who provably have never actually succeeded at anything. And that's a problem, right? It's a problem when money is going to people who have never built an organization that's cash positive. That is, and what it means to be cash positive is you are incrementally making society more efficient. That's the way people generate money in our society, is that you build a product that people pay to have in their lives. And that is it's sort of a test of a person's ability to create real world competence. But in the crypto space, for a long time, people haven't needed to, there's been so few people, and it's been such a, this is also true in the city state movement. This is also true with sea studying, but this is also true in the crypto movement, where capital flows to the popular people and not necessarily the people who have proven that they can effectively operate companies. And that is a shame, because it means a lot of capital is burning and being wasted. But what's really cool about it is it also means that if you are an operator, or if you just see this one simple truth about how society is structured, that investing in operators is going to net you actually durable cultural institutions and social institutions and companies, well, then you've got this huge area of arbitrage, because so much of the capital flow in the world, even if you're working with less money, is being burned on well, sort of the modern iteration of theocrats.
Got it. So you feel like the hypothesis was never tested because the people that were in charge were, I mean, I 100%, I'm on the same page, 100%, but there's something about like the nature of that argument, right? The right person wasn't in charge, right? And maybe it's just because I'm so used to it being made from the left, right? But I guess, how would you characterize, let's say the right person is in charge, people believe the right person is in charge. What are the likely fail points, even if you have the best people in charge of a charter city?
Yeah, so the three core things that you need to keep in mind with a charter city is and a lot of people who have done this in the past, they thought basically a charter city is two things, right? They said, okay, what I need to do is I need to convince the government to section off land for me, and then I need to, using an ideology, raise money to implement that ideology, because I believe this ideology is like a more just way of running a company, a country, or something like that, right? And so they use that to raise money and create their countries, without really paying attention to how do I create a country which has people in it, like demand for people, and that those people can earn an income. Like those are actually the two things you need to pay attention to. What makes this country a desirable place for people to come to? But even more important to that, the very single most important thing that you need to think about is why are companies setting up in my country and not in other countries, right? Like it's a huge impetus to set up a company in a country like this. And it's a huge investment, especially when they're not sure that the country is going to be stable or something like that. Weirdly, like when I see the other people who are doing charter city movements, they don't ask this question. Like it's just not a question that's particularly important to them. And that's why when we're talking about like the key area of differentiation, where like medical technology can be operated here more safely and more durably, like if you're raising money, than anywhere else you can operate it in the world. Well, now you have jobs. Now that you have jobs, you have a reason for people to move. You have a reason for people to stay. There is a reason for this to exist, other than just I live in the pretty city of crypto bros because ideologically I'm a crypto bro, right? That is not a good reason to do a country. So
but we're all moving to Puerto Rico. We're all gonna do it.
But they're
I've
not.
seen it. I know,
right?
I know.
No, but that's the point.
Some fun parties though. Some really fun parties going on in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
But it's not a workers' utopia though.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't want to create a workers' utopia. If you actually, my wife had this great idea for a charter city. We're not doing it because it doesn't interest us, but it's an example of like a well-structured charter city. So she said, well, you could do a city, so you need capital and you need people, right? What if you had a charter city that specifically prison systems in other countries would pay you to take their prisoners? So they want to get rid of part of their prison population.
Yeah.
You essentially create like a walled city that is much more structured than our existing society, and people sell their prisoners to you, but then you allow the prisoners to, because it's ethical, right, live a much more free life than they can within the existing prison system, and through that be economic contributors. And you could use this sort of a city to build many sorts of specialist industries that you couldn't build in other countries. Like, for example, you could have military corps, like what's that one that Russia was using until a guy had a coup? Brain fart.
Prigozhin was the guy, but what was it
Wagner?
called?
Wagner,
group,
yeah. So you could have like a Wagner-like operation where you are using these former prisoners for like private military organizations out of the country. It'd be a great place to set up private military organizations because the laws could be structured in a way that made it uniquely easy to run international private military corps out of the country. So one, you've got people coming into your country. Two, countries are paying you to be doing this. So you're getting income along with these citizens. Three, these citizens are generating income at likely, tax bases that you couldn't have anywhere else in the world because people would just leave. But these people can't just leave. I mean, that's the purpose of the way you're setting up this charter city. And you would be able to conduct business operations in a way that you couldn't in other countries. For example, more efficient recruiting for private military organizations because you have this captured audience, captive audience, literally. And then you could use that to compete with rather unethical. I mean, you look at the private military organizations today, when they operate in other countries, they take control of their natural resources and then use it to fund, quite unethical things. Well, you could use these resources to fund more ethical operations. I mean, marginally more ethical operations. And you could do fun stuff. You have Prisoner Island. Well, now you can have like Blood Dome or something because people consent to battle to the death. I bet that would play really well in international media. Well, I mean, not well in terms of
pay-per-views.
People would love you for it, but I think a lot of people would pay to watch that.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of fun stuff like that you could do, and you would have an actually economically viable city. Now, of course, that could hurt your access to prisoners because people are like, whoa, that's Naughty Island. We don't go there. But I'm sure everywhere in the world, there's people who would, you look at how much it costs to house prisoners in the U.S. It's actually pretty expensive. Here, I can just give you an idea right now. Cost per year per USA prisoner. The average prisoner costs between $14,000 to $70,000 a year. So the average level is $40,000 to incarcerate someone in a federal prison. So, they can pay us $20,000 and we'll keep the prisoners, because we're keeping them in a much more free environment, which costs a lot less to operate. So it's a net benefit to the U.S. taxpayer and the prisoner, because the prisoner can operate in an economically free environment. So that's an example of like how you can think about these problems differently than people in the movement who are blinded by their ideology aren't thinking about it right now.